Hello, I'm Matt Lamford.
Greetings, I'm Robert Folsom.
Welcome to Mood and Markets, where we talk about how social mood moves trends in the financial markets and beyond. Today, the area beyond the markets that we'll be discussing is international conflict, particularly the building tension between China and Taiwan.
Matt, our viewers realize that mood and markets goes deeper than the latest headlines. We show how social mood drives the trends around us, which is to say this episode is not going to be about geopolitics or economic fundamentals or the personality of a given world leader. What we're going to do is use the socionomic perspective to uncover why tension is building now, and we'll place the trends in a historical context like only a socionomic analysis can do.
Absolutely. And the socionomic perspective serves as an Occam's razor that cuts away a lot of what ends up being extraneous information to help us zero in on what matters most. The premise of socionomics is that social mood regulates the overall tenor and character of social behavior. In layman's terms, that basically just means that the way people feel influences what they do. And so when we think about conflict, that's a behavior that's more likely to be brought on by negative social mood. And indeed, Robert, throughout history, we see periods of negative mood associated with periods of greater propensity toward conflict.
Yeah, yes, we do. And in fact, many of history's most epic conflicts, they make the most sense simply by looking at a chart of social mood, namely the major stock market indexes. Bull market periods indicate positive social mood, and bear markets indicate periods of negative social mood. And here's a classic chart from Robert Prechter, and it shows 300 plus years of stock price action and major conflicts. And it shows that the American Revolution and a few years later, the French Revolution erupted around the end of a 6-decade trend in negative mood. And together, these two conflicts amounted to the beginning of the end of European monarchy itself. The Napoleonic Wars were fought very early in the 19th century, and it was a period of deeply unstable and mixed mood. The American Civil War came on the heels of a large correction in stock prices. So did World Wars I and II. And we see the negative mood trend of 1966 through 1982. It brought the Cultural Revolution in China, an escalation of the Vietnam War, the killing fields of Cambodia, and the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan. Negative mood, likewise, it drove the correction of the early 2000s, and that included the launch of the War on Terror and the hot wars in Iraq and Afghanistan.
Robert, that chart uses U.S. stock prices as a measure of global social mood, and when socionomists have studied China's history of conflict, they've likewise relied on U.S. stock prices as a measure of global mood to contextualize the timing. In fact, we can take a look at a chart from the November 2019 issue of the Socionomist that does exactly that. The chart begins with the 1929 stock market high, after which there was a 20-year trend toward negative social mood, and that was reflected in a 20-year stock market correction. Now, within that correction, China and Japan went to war in 1937. In 1946, a major domestic conflict broke out in China as communists and nationalists fought. In 1949, that near the end of the correction, the communists ended up coming out on top. Mao Zedong took over as the country's leader. And the following year, China entered the Korean War. Now, after that, there was a large degree bull market that took off, and positive mood held sway at large degree until the 1966 high. But on the way to that high, there were a pair of small degree setbacks that were each associated with conflict involving China. The first in 1957, China announced it had built a road through territory that was claimed by India. And then toward the end of a subsequent smaller degree correction, China and India ended up going to war over that contested territory. Now, we did get another large degree negative mood trend from 1966 to 1982, and this period is associated with more international conflicts involving China. In fact, in 1969, China and the Soviet Union had a border dispute, and in 1979, China went to war with Vietnam.
Yes. Matt, some of our viewers may wonder, why do we use U.S. stock charts to measure social mood? Well, Simple fact is, China had no national stock market for much of this period. The country actually does have a longer history of stock trading, maybe than viewers would suppose. China's first trading organization, it was founded in 1891. The Shanghai Stock Exchange became integrated with the New York Stock Exchange itself. And an article from Goldman Sachs reports that by 1937, orders between New York and Shanghai were actually relayed by cable and radio within 16 minutes. But trading suspended in 1941 because of China's war with Japan. The index restarted in 1946, but once the communists took control of the country in 1949, trading it came to a halt for decades, and the stock exchange itself was liquidated in 1950.
Wow, Robert, I mean, that story on its own has quite the interplay of mood markets and conflict wrapped up in it. And what's interesting is that when we do get to more recent decades, when stock trading has resumed in China, the pattern of these negative mood periods, bear markets, being associated with heightened conflict risk, why that pattern has continued. In fact, this chart is from the September 2022 issue of the Socionomist, and it's an update of a chart that we had originally published actually back in the November 2019 issue. And it starts near the all-time high in the Shanghai Composite in 2007. And you can think of the entire subsequent period as one large degree negative mood trend. And interestingly, the periods near smaller degree lows within that correction have been associated with heightened risk of conflict. I mean, just look at the timing of China beginning construction on its military outpost in the South China Sea, its strategic support force, which is reportedly designed to sabotage other countries' war command systems. It's ignoring of an international tribunal that ruled its claim to sovereignty in the South China Sea had no legal basis, its conflicts with India and South Korea, the military buildup and shows of hostility toward Taiwan, its crackdown on Hong Kong, its escort of a U.S. destroyer out of contested waters, and then its then largest military drills in the Taiwan Strait. Each of these came toward lows within the larger degree market correction, and that is, came within this larger degree trend toward negative social mood.
Right. So we've skimmed the history almost up to the present. But before we show what the Shanghai Composite looks like today, I think we need to say that China and Taiwan is not the only international dispute in the headlines.
Fair enough. Of course, yes, there's China and Taiwan, but we're really in this season of what feels like conflict. Of course, there's Israel and Hamas and of course Russia and Ukraine, to name a handful of other examples.
Right. And speaking of the conflict between Russia and Ukraine, the April 2024 issue of the Socionomics made an intriguing comparison between the timing of Russia's invasion of Ukraine and the current pattern in the Shanghai Composite. Here's a chart of the RTSI, Russia's benchmark stock index, from the February 2022 issue of EWI's Global Market Perspective. We normally don't show Elliott wave labels on charts when we do mood markets, but our reason for doing it now is going to be obvious in a moment. The chart shows what Elliotticians call a triangle pattern, and that had been unfolding in the RTSI since 2008. And so our analysis in February 2022 said that the final wave down in the triangle was likely underway, and with that would come an intensification in negative mood, specifically a greater probability that Russia would invade Ukraine. And indeed, Russia did invade Ukraine some 3 weeks after we published the chart. The April 2024 issue of the Socionomics noted that this RTSI chart offered more than a passing resemblance to the pattern that's been unfolding in the Shanghai Composite. EWI's Asian Pacific analyst is likewise counting a triangle pattern, and the index is potentially in a similar position.
Well, of course, a conventional analyst, Robert, could probably point out dozens of differences between China and Russia in terms of their economic fundamentals, the geopolitics of their respective regions, and so on. But socionomically, this similarity in the market patterns is noteworthy. The present juncture in the Shanghai Composite indicates a window for a period of increased conflict risk.
Right, conflict risk indeed. EWI's Mark Galashevsky anticipated that in 2021. And what he said to subscribers in April 2021 in the Asia Pacific financial forecast. It's worth quoting in full. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. Quote, a conflict between China and Taiwan would have the greatest significance for the China-U.S. rivalry and therefore for Asia and world history. Emboldened by its successful absorption of Hong Kong, China could easily follow Russia's lead in Crimea and seize the Matsu and Kinmen or Quemoy Islands, which military strategists for President Eisenhower's administration deemed to be indefensible even in the 1950s, when U.S. military advantage was much greater. The mere presence of overwhelming Chinese air and sea power in the strait could even force Taiwan's leaders to cede the main island if their allies were to decide that defending Taiwan was not worth the lives that would be lost in the process. The improving regional mood underlying the ongoing bull market from March 2020 will continue to temper China's provocations for a while, but outright conflict in the Taiwan Strait and the East and South China Seas generally will become more likely during the next regional bear market, end quote. So, as the bear market in China resumed its downward trend, tension between China and Taiwan increased. And Matt, when Russia invaded Ukraine 2 years ago, the world became a different place. And not just for those two countries, but for NATO and arguably for the whole of Europe. And if anything of the kind erupts between China and Taiwan, the world's going to become a different place all over again, and probably not for the better.
Well, Robert, it is certainly a part of the world we will keep an eye on. On that note, let's wrap up for today. To our viewers, thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the video, be sure to like, comment, subscribe. It really does help the channel. Robert, thank you for this conversation. Let's talk again soon.
Thank you, Matt. Let's talk soon.